Excuse me. Okay, so the particle emitter, we have the particle emitter already set in our scene. The next thing that we need is we need an environment. So if you go to Objects, if you go down to Scene, and then you choose an environment, the environment is what allows us to have volume to our particles to make these cloudy kind of smoky effects. The next thing you need two materials that are the Pyrocluster materials. So in the materials palette, if you go to File, and then if you go to Shader, and over down to, you need Pyrocluster, okay, that's the first one. And then you also need, under the same place, you need the volume tracer, okay. The volume tracer gets added to the environment, okay, and this allows the program to calculate that sort of puffy, cloudy kind of shape that you see. And the next thing is the Pyrocluster gets added to the emitter, okay. And when you do this, you can start to, you'll be able to see right away when you render this out, if we stop and play this again, that we have some puffs, excuse my runny nose here, puffs of clouds of smoke kind of coming throughout. Also notice how long this takes to render, okay? There's a lot more processing power that's needed to make that randomized kind of cloudy, smoky effect. And of course, the more particles that you have, the longer it's going to take to render. Now, just some quick things that we can look at in terms of changing the parameters. In the Pyrocluster material, you can always change, yourself. You can just change the color, the gradient, some of those basic things. There are also some pretty good presets. So if you go down to Settings, you can choose Fire, which makes this kind of reddish orange in the center and black towards the outside. And if you render this out, you can see that it has that kind of quality, that fiery sort of quality to it. So that's an option. I won't wait for it to render out entirety, but I'll experiment with a few of these different settings. That's a pretty good one. The other one that I think is pretty good is the smoke, which is just a black kind of sooty, smoky kind of look, which is pretty nice. And of course, against the black background, it's going to be pretty hard to see. So why don't we put a light in here? I'm just going to drop a light really quickly so we can see this better. And with a light, I'm just going to grab some soft shadow so we can see it. There we go. Let's render that out. And again, if you add light to your scene, that's also going to take an awful lot longer to render. So you play around with the presets a little bit. And of course, the lighting in the environment is going to affect the way that you read that smoke across the surface, or the fire, or the steam, or any of those other elements that you add to it. And I also encourage you to play around with the different settings, of color and materials, to see what kind of effects you can get out of it. Now, the other thing that I wanted to talk about in terms of utilizing the smoky kind of particles is if you just simply click on if you double click on the Pyrocluster tool, if we go to, let's see, shape, right here, shape, you can select preview for the shape, and what it will do is it will give you a I like to use spheres for this sort of smoky effect, because it will give you kind of a basic shape of the size of those puffs of clouds of smoke. Now, of course, the different settings are going to have different variants within those parameters, but it's not going to go outside of that basic shape that it's giving you. And so you can control, using the shape tool, you can control the radius. So let's say we wanted it to be 200 instead of 100, you can make a bigger sort of puff of smoke. So it's basically, instead of using an object to assign the shape of it, we need to sort of have a hypothetical object that puff of cloud of particles will exist within. So you can really control those different parameters. Some of the other elements have to do with the age. The age effect has to do with how this smoke kind of dissipates over time. These slider bars are a little bit confusing. Just right now, they look like they will do some visual sort of effects and having a gradient and those sort of things. Really, what you need to do to play around with this is just play around with the sliders. And again, it's going to control. You'll be able to see how it affects the age over time. The radius, if it's very high, it will sort of grow really large. If it's less, then it will sort of grow really slowly, so you can play around with some of those parameters back and forth. They get to be just slightly confusing, but the best thing to do is just kind of play around and see. The other thing that's important is the noise, and you can choose different types of noise here. So you can have something that's gaseous, fire, electric, irregular. There's all kinds of different types of turbulence and noise, and they're going to affect how that puffy cloud of smoke really looks. And so again, the best thing to do is to set up a very simple kind of scene, get your particles set up with the color and tone that you want, and then go into the noise and play around with the different types of effects there are. There's many different ways that you can really control that type of noise across the scene. But just remember that if you're using that in your scene, it's going to take up a lot of render power. So you're going to want to give yourself the accurate amount of time to really render out those settings. Okay.